Hey everyone, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly sponsored lecture. Tonight's sponsor is Robert Veneris, and his topic is something I hadn't heard of before, but I knew what it was. I just didn't know it had a name. He wants me to lecture on the Boleslavsky Hole. I'd never heard that term, but I see on the internet there's several pages that talk about it. I've heard of Boleslavsky, and you can see his Wikipedia article. One of the best players in the world for about 10 years. Died pretty young, late 70s. And if you go down in the Wikipedia article to get to what we're interested in for this particular lecture, I mean, we could have a lecture on Boleslavsky, good player. Maybe we did. I don't know. I do a lot of lectures. And then I'm going to highlight in blue one of Boleslavsky's main contributions to opening theory is the Boleslavsky variation. Not named after Mr. Variation, which is what you thought previous to this, in the Sicilian. Then it says a feature of the plunge structure is called the Boleslavsky Hole. Okay, then later, there's a very long paragraph about the Boleslavsky Hole. And I like this diagram because the Boleslavsky Hole is based on the plunge structure, not where the pieces are. Conversely, the Boleslavsky variation of the Sicilian, which is something that I've played with black, is specific. And I think to honor Boleslavsky, I'm going to show you a few different positions out of the opening that have the Boleslavsky Hole. And then the games I'm going to show are in the Boleslavsky Sicilian, which is the most common way to get the Boleslavsky Hole. Now, the sponsor, Mr. Veneris, he didn't want me to show games where white wins every game or black wins every game. He wanted to show a sample of white winning and black winning and whether, I think from the sponsor's point of view, the Boleslavsky Hole doesn't make sense for black. Why is black doing that? So we're going to discuss that. And so forth. Okay, and then his Wikipedia article, I think, is about the right length for what it should be for his chess strength. He was a world championship candidate, one of the top 15 players in the world, I would say. And they talk about him a bit. So that's fair. Okay, so let's get to the games, and I'm gonna overtake this game and just show you the Boleslavsky Hole. Then when I'm done doing that, I'm gonna show you the games. Okay, so Boleslavsky Hole defined is the C pawn is traded typically for the D pawn, but the C pawn's gone, and black has pawns on D6 and E5. And obviously, if black has pawns on E5 and D6, but the C pawn is still here, black can play C6 and defend D5. So that's no big deal. Also, technically, if you play E6, D6, C5, which you'll find in some Sicilians and in a lot of Englishes, that's not the Boleslavsky Hole, although it is. It's not technically called that because black still has the C pawn, but I mean, this C pawn can't control D5. So for all intents and purposes, that's also the Boleslavsky hole, but it's not technically called that. Okay, so let's look at a Najdorf, which we're not going to do during the lecture. I'm just going to show you some examples. Okay, whoops. Okay, this is a Najdorf Sicilian. There's 1 billion games in Grandmaster play and others in this position. And irrespective of whether white plays bishop e2 or bishop e3, one of the common moves for black is e5. So we'll play bishop e2 just for demonstration purposes. E5. Now we have a Boleslavsky hole. This is not the Boleslavsky variation. This is a Najdorf. But the Najdorf can lead to the Boleslavsky hole. All you need is the C pawn to be gone. It's gone. Pawn on d6, pawn on e5. Then you create this hole on d5. Okay. So that's an example of the Boleslavsky hole from the Najdorf. Another example, which is very common, is the Sveshnikov. And this is the main, this is the main line of the Sveshnikov. Then d6. This is also a Boleslavsky hole. It's not the Boleslavsky. That's different. We haven't looked at the Boleslavsky variation yet, but that's all the games I'm going to look at. I want to look at 4 games so we can see 2 games white 1, 2 games black 1. I don't have time to look at 4 games in all Boleslavsky holes. That would take about 3 hours. So we're going to, 45-minute lecture. So to honor Boleslavsky, we're going to look at the Boleslavsky variation, but it's a Boleslavsky hole lecture. So you know what the Boleslavsky hole is. C pawn's gone, and black has pawns on d6 and e5. And this could happen in a King's Indian, but it would be a little weird. You could do it. Somehow, black is playing the King's Indian, and usually black plays d6 and e5 in the King's Indian. If black prefaced that with c5 and c takes d4, then we get a Boleslavsky hole. It's rare, because typically in the King's Indian, you don't play c5 and e5 and trade your c pawn. This is it's not common. But it could happen. And I would argue you could get the Boleslavsky hole from an English. I didn't think about it before the lecture. I'll try to make it up now as I go along. That way we can see if I'm incredibly stupid or if what I said makes sense. This is a symmetrical English. This is a lot of Grandmaster games. E5 is a move. It's not the most common move. Then d6. And this is a Boleslavsky hole. So the Boleslavsky hole can happen in many variations. And I would say the most common is the Boleslavsky variation. And we're going to look at games where the players are really good, because then we can see how to play correctly. So the first 2 games, black wins. That's why black's at the bottom. The next 2 games, white wins. Then the lecture's over. Okay, so first game is Nigel Short white. Nigel Short has had white in the Sicilian more than you have. Nigel Short's had hundreds of games where he's white in a Sicilian. And Hikaru Nakamura is black. He plays every opening, as sometimes it's a Sicilian. Probably not is most common line against e4. And also, Nakamura is not going to have black in a Boleslavsky Sicilian very often, because when Nakamura plays the Sicilian, usually plays the Najdorf. However, if Nakamura plays the Najdorf, then plays e5, then he gets the Boleslavsky Hole, just not the Boleslavsky variation. Okay, so this is short Nakamura. This was played in Wijk on Zee in 2010. And when you get the Boleslavsky variation, sometimes black plays d6 on move 2, sometimes black plays knight c6 on move 2, and then later on move 4 or 5, black plays the one he didn't play earlier. So if you're playing me and we get a Boleslavsky Sicilian, which is possible, I play knight c6 on move 2. And then later I play d6. Hikaru plays d6, and if I was Nigel, I would assume it's a Najdorf, because Hikaru usually plays the Najdorf. Okay, and a6 is the Najdorf, and we can get the Boleslavsky Hole. E6 is the Scheveningen, then we're not getting that. G6 is the dragon. If you get the Boleslavsky Hole and the dragon, that's not good. When you play the dragon with black, you don't want to play e5 and block your bishop. You can get the Boleslavsky Hole if you play the dragon with black. That means probably something went wrong. You played e5 and you don't want to play e5. Okay, now Hikaru played knight c6, which is slightly surprising because this isn't what Nakamura normally does. Probably, since these games are played in Super GM tournaments, which means people can prepare for the tournament for weeks, and they get the pairings of every round before the tournament starts. It's a round robin. You can prepare with your coach for hours. In fact, your coach can prepare all night while you're asleep. And so Nakamura probably thought, if I play the Sicilian, which is one of the openings I play with black, Nigel's going to prepare for the Najdorf, because I usually play the Najdorf. But if I play the classical Sicilian, then Nigel won't have prepared for that, so he'll just have to use whatever prep he has over the years, not prep that he did last night for hours. Okay, so in this position, white has several moves. The only move that gets us to the Boleslavsky variation is bishop e2. Although you could transpose if white plays f3 and plays bishop e2 later. But that's pretty rare. It could happen. Okay, after bishop e2, there's two moves that black plays to take advantage of bishop e2. There's the Boleslavsky variation, which we're going to discuss in this lecture. And there's g6, which is the dragon. And white's already played bishop e2, which is a bit innocuous against the dragon. So I think g6 is an excellent move. But a lot of people won't play it because they don't play the dragon. And they don't want to play the dragon now just because it's a favorable variation, because, they haven't studied the dragon. Okay, the Boleslavsky variation, which when I've had this position with black, I always play, is e5. And that gives black the Boleslavsky Hole in the Boleslavsky variation. And white can play knight f3 or knight b3. We'll see examples of both. Okay, Nigel played knight f3. Then Hikaru played h6. With the Boleslavsky Hole, it's very common that white plays bishop g5 and takes the knight, because the knight is defending d5. And so Hikaru says, no, you're not going to do that. I'll play h6, so you can never play bishop g5. In some cases, after bishop e6, white can also play knight g5 later. So black stops all that. White's not putting anything on g5. Nigel castles, bishop e6, defending the hole. And what white wants to do is play knight d5. However, if you're going to play knight d5, you have to defend your e-pawn again. If you play knight d5, knight takes e4 would always refute that. So in most of the games we're going to look at today, white plays knight d5 at some point, but not when it hangs the e-pawn. Okay, so Nigel played b3. That controls the c4 square, stopping black from playing knight a5 to c4 or knight a5 and bishop c4. And the bishop on e3 could get attacked by a knight, or if I play d5 at some point, which black likes to play, bishop on e3 is not well placed because the knight would attack it. Bishop's better placed on b2, putting pressure on the e5 pawn. Assuming black plays d5. If black doesn't play d5, white's happy because Boleslavsky Hole and weak pawn on d6. Okay, he played a6, typical Sicilian move. Rook e1, point of rook e1 is to always play bishop f1. The rook defends the e-pawn, and now you can play knight d5. Normal. Rook c8, rook goes on the open file. Bishop b2, defending the knight, developing. Bishop e7, developing. Now in this position, if white doesn't mind losing 1,000 tempi, white can play h3 and prevent bishop g4. Now, typically, you don't want to have this pawn structure giving up d5, but what you get out of it is you get d4. You kick the knight out of d4. Occasionally, you can play bishop g4, take the knight, and play knight d4. So, I mean, white has knight d5, black has knight d4. Okay, Nigel didn't care about bishop g4. He played bishop f1, and Hikaru castled. Again, white could play h3, but Nigel played knight d5. Now that his pawn is defended by his rook, there's no knight takes e4. Okay, so strategically, I like this game. White tries to put the knight in the Boleslavsky hole. It's the Boleslavsky variation. White's bishops aren't very active. Black has good control of a lot of the center squares. Black has all their pieces developed. And the negative for black is, white gets to come into d5. Bishop g4. Nigel never played h3. Hikaru's going to try to play knight d4 and take advantage of the pinned knight. c4, strengthening d5 square. Knight takes. In these positions, sometimes it's better to take with a pawn. Sometimes better to take with e-pawn. And Nigel played the engine move, which is to take with e-pawn, getting one of my favorite pawn structures, connect 4. White has a queenside majority. And problem with taking with the c-pawn is later in the game, black can play f5 and hit the e-pawn, open up the file for his rook, put pressure on the knight. So basically, this makes the rook unable to be on the open f file because we can't take the e-pawn. So black f-pawn is going to be in front of the black rook. Okay. Knight b8. And this is sort of like the Breyer Ruy Lopez, where black plays knight b8 to d7 to c5. This is actually very common in the Boleslavsky variation because white has a pawn on d5. We can't have a knight on c6. So black wants to put the knight on c5. Black wants to play b5, attacking the c pawn. Black wants to play f5, gaining space. And when I was growing up, and now, I haven't changed my mind, typically you don't want a pawn on d5. You want a piece there, and that keeps the d6 pawn weaker because it's on a half-open file. With a pawn on d5, the d pawn's not weak because it can't be attacked, and black has f5 and stuff. So black shouldn't be too worried. h3, bishop h5, bishop e2, knight d7, rook c1. Nothing much is happening. Hikaru could play f5 here, but Hikaru plays bishop g6, which is, I think, making the game more complicated. b4, white has a pawn majority on the queen side, so white plays on the queen side, black plays on the king side. Black played e4, attacking the knight. Knight went back. Queen b6, attacking the pawn. Now, I took the comments away of this game, although I did read them. And the commentator, I think it was Fatachnik, the Czech grandmaster, he says a3 is a bad move. And he says now black should play e3 and black is better. But Hikaru didn't do that. Hikaru played bishop h4, which attacks f2. Aggressive play by Hikaru. Nigel plays c5, playing on the queen side, stopping any shenanigans on f2. Takes. Knight c4. The white knight is great on c4. White sacrificed a pawn. Queen goes back to d8. Bishop h5, which threatens to mess up black's king side, which Nakamura decided was fine. In compensation for the pawn, white has a great knight, white has a great bishop, white has a passed d pawn, etc. Nakamura literally didn't care about doubling the pawns on the king side because that opens up his rook, and now he's threatening to take on f2, probably with the bishop because that wins material. Nigel ignored that, took the e4 pawn, takes, and this position, black has actually had two pawns because black took the c5 pawn and took the b4 pawn, and white never recaptured. Black's kingside pawn structure is sort of weird. White has the great knight, white has the great passed pawn, white has a great bishop, but two pawns is two pawns. b5, typical Sicilian move. Knight e5, traded the rooks, traded the knights. Bishop g3, attacking the rook, attacks the bishop. Everybody's attacking everybody, and black's up two pawns. White has compensation. Black has a lot of doubled pawns, and white has a passed pawn on the fifth. Black's king is very safe behind these pawns. White's king is not as safe. If I can get a queen and bishop to line up on the diagonal, and I have f1, you have to defend that. d5 pawn is blocked. This looks really good for black. Nigel got one of his pawns back. Queen f6. Hikaru wants to play either queen e5 or queen f1. Both good. Bishop e3, trying to defend the king. So now if queen e5, bishop g1, queen check. Then problem with queen takes queen is black plays rook b1. Oops, sorry. Black plays rook b1, and you can't defend your b pawn. It's a bad endgame. Black has two connected passed pawns. Black's up 2 pawns. White's bishop is pinned. So Nigel correctly played bishop g1 immediately. Hikaru said, I'd like to capture that pawn. G4, getting the king out for the queen trade, which is what happened. Now, White's king can move out if necessary. And black just waiting. Black's up 2 pawns and has 2 connected passed pawns. Then Hikaru calculated this before he played b4. Played b3. And after takes, plays rook b4. This is very nice because the truth hurts. So White has 2 moves. The move that Nigel played and the move he didn't play. He didn't play bishop d4, then rook b6, because the black king is on g8. So I can defend my pawn, then play king f7, and this plus a million. So instead, Nigel played rook d8 check. Hikaru just tucked his king away. And Nigel resigned. In this position, the engine says bishop d4, takes, rook b8, rook d3. And then problem is, if White doesn't do anything, Black's going to play a5, a4. Truth hurts. So White goes here to try to dissuade Black from, White's going to queen too. But then Black just takes the pawn, goes back. White doesn't have any pawns. Black has 3 extra pawns. What else? So after king h7, Nigel resigned. So that was a very complex game where I think the psychological part of the game for me was Hikaru didn't play his usual Najdorf because Nigel's been beating the Najdorf his whole life. And by playing the Sicilian, it looks very likely Hikaru's going to play a Najdorf, and he plays the classical Sicilian, plays the Boleslavsky variation, and Short wasn't expecting that. And probably the night before this game, Hikaru and whoever his coaches are prepared for the Boleslavsky variation, and Nigel probably prepared for the Najdorf and other openings that Black can play. So, good decision by Hikaru. Okay, now, I don't want you to think this is the channel that shows Nigel Short's losses and Go America and so forth. So, in a funny happenstance, the next game, Nigel Short is Black in the Boleslavsky. So, that sort of already proves you can't just say this opening is good or bad for White or Black, because Nigel's playing White and Black in the same opening. This game was played earlier in Tilburg in 1992. Nigel's Black. Nigel not known to play the Boleslavsky, and his opponent is Ian Rogers, who spends half the year in the Netherlands and half the year in Australia, depending on what half of the year it is. So I guess this was his half of the year that he was in the Netherlands, because this tournament's in the Netherlands. Okay, so Ian is White, Nigel is Black, 1992, when I lived in Europe. Okay, and then this is the starting position for the 4 games I'm going to show. Ian played knight b3. You'll remember Nigel played knight f3 against Hikaru. h6. It's the same spiel white wants to do this and take and play knight d5, and black says no. Castles. King h1, indicating white wants to play f4, and wants to get off this diagonal. White played f4. And this position, if we take, then the bishop develops, and recaptures. So you always want to do that. You want to recapture and develop at the same time. If we play a developing move like bishop e6, then f5 attacks our bishop. So Nigel didn't do any of that, played rook e8. And he envisions somehow these pawns getting traded, either by white trading or black trading, then, have some pressure on the e4 pawn. So Ian said, no, we're not, your rook on e8's not going to make any sense. Played f5. Okay, so now the rook on e8 doesn't do anything. Okay, a5, Nigel plays on the queen side. Nigel could also play a6, b5. I like playing a5, and I like doing what Nigel does this game, and I've done it before in the Boleslavsky. When they play knight b3, you can go attack their knight and kick it. And if they don't let you, and they play a4, they're giving away the b4 square, which is important because, black wants to play d5. Then, black doesn't have a backward pawn anymore. There's no Boleslavsky hole. Okay, so Ian played bishop e3, a4, a3, b3 to make sure the pawn structure is okay. Then played knight d4 because Nigel, being a grandmaster, wants the two bishops. So is it this bishop? Is it this bishop? Doesn't matter, long as it's the two bishops. And, d4 is a nice square for the knight. And typically, when there's a Boleslavsky hole on d5, we are worried about knight d5 more than we can play knight d4, but knight d4. Bishop c4, controlling the d5 square more, stopping black from getting two bishops. Bishop d7, typically black wants to play bishop c6 and defend d5 and put pressure on e4. Knight d5, finally. Rook c8, rook c1, b5, and then white decides to occupy the Boleslavsky hole with his bishop. So he takes with check and then plays bishop d5. Now we see why Ian Rogers played rook c1, defending his c pawn before it was attacked. Rook c3, attacking the bishop. Nigel's getting set up for the short gun. Queen c7, rook c8, put pressure on the c file. Bishop saves itself. Queen c7, threatening c2, and I don't see a defense. Basically, in this game, black dominated on the queen side. Rook c3, a3, b5, knight d4, queen c7, right? Everything on the queen side, putting pressure everywhere. And white dominated d5, which is, the drawback of playing the Boleslavsky. Sometimes your opponent controlled d5. And Nigel said, I'm doing other stuff. You can have d5. Knight b1, attacking the rook and the a pawn. Rook c2. Knight takes pawn. Takes. Rook c8, black wants to dominate the c file. So if white takes, black takes with the rook, and black has the c file. So he played bishop e3. Then Nigel decided to attack, played queen a5, discovered attack on the queen. The queen also defending the knight. So queen b2. Queen c3, attacking the queen and the bishop. So they traded. Bishop's attack now. Bishop d2. Rook d3. Nigel continues to play super aggressive. Bishop a5 is a weird square for the bishop. And knight takes f5, a good tactical trick. So, obviously, if you take it, then you take this, and black's a pawn up with the two bishops. And if white takes with the rook d1 is going to be mate. And bishop takes rook wins. And rook takes bishop wins. If you play the obvious desperado, bishop f7, engine says good for black. Two connected passed pawns in the center, two bishops, white's pieces off sides. Terrible. Says black should be winning there. So Rogers didn't do anything about knight takes f5. He just put his knight back on a good square. And black's a pawn up. And black just, Nigel Short has good technique. Nigel starts attacking on the king side, since white's pieces are all on the queen side. Doesn't want to trade rooks, wants to start attacking. Nigel wants to play h4 and bishop f4 check. That would be quite annoying. Attacks the rook. Stops h4 and bishop f4 check. h4 anyway. And at this position, Rogers resigned because Rogers is going to lose his h-pawn. And Rogers already down a pawn. So that can't be down two pawns in an endgame. That's too much. The variation the commentator gave was king g2, defending the g-pawn, the h-pawn, knight h4 check, and then take. Black's threatening mate. And black's two pawns up. Black has a big initiative against white's king. And white's bishops are over here hiding out. So a crushing victory for Nigel. Made it look easy. White dominated d5 the whole game and still does. And black just played around that. Played on the queen side. Played on the c file. Started pushing his h-pawn, controlled f4, and white never did anything. And that's why Nigel Short was one of the best players in the world, and Ian Rogers is probably the greatest player from Australia. But Ian Rogers was never top 10, top 20 in the world. He was a strong grandmaster, but not as strong as Nigel. This game was played 33 years ago. Nigel was a lot younger. Nigel was good 33 years ago. Okay, I better hurry up because I'm taking too long. Now you see two white wins. Carlsen versus Duda. Those guys were pretty good. This was a rapid game played in 2023. And the next two games prove that black doesn't always win. Transposed, played a funny move order, and we got to the same position. Okay, then Boleslavsky variation. Carlsen played knight f3. He played knight f3 or knight b3, which we've already seen. h6 we've seen already a couple times. Carlsen plays for the standard rook e1, bishop f1, knight d5. At this position, Carlsen plays h3 and says don't play bishop g4. That's annoying. Plays b3, just like we saw in game one. And Carlsen gets similar pawn structure that we saw first game. a6, bishop b2, b5. People just developing their pieces. Finally, In the Boleslavsky variation, Carlsen occupies the Boleslavsky Hole. Yeah, I can't make that joke. It was a good joke, too. It was very good. It was like, it was relevant. It's current events. It's a pretty good joke. But okay, I mean, this is a lecture. This isn't, me talking to Karen and, we're laying in bed. Okay, so sorry for you people who wanted to hear that joke. Truth hurts. I'll tell the joke on my stream. I feel safer doing that than a lecture somebody sponsored. Okay, so takes, and Carlsen got this connect 4 pawn structure that we saw in the game between Nigel and Hikaru about 25 minutes ago. In that game, Nigel didn't play h3, so Hikaru was doing stuff with his bishop and ended up playing e4. Obviously, Black's going to have trouble playing e4 this game unless he plays f5 first. Okay, queen d7. Advancing on the queen side. White gets the queen side going. Bishop on b7. Doesn't look like it has a lot of activity. Black always wants to go to the f4 square when possible. a5, playing on the queen side. Finally, Duda plays e4. Wants to play knight e5 later. Knight's pretty good. Now the c pawn is attacked. Carlsen defends it. Now the game gets super tactical, and Arbiter had to stop the game because it was too exciting. Queen a4. Now, I would like to point out, if I was white against Duda, this would not work out well for me. I would think I'm losing. I would be like, man, he's attacking this, and I would completely fall apart. Black's pieces are very active. But white has this beautiful pawn on d5, crushing the bishop on b7, controlling squares in black's position. So strategically, white's better. It's just that black has these tactics that I would fail to avoid. Okay, but okay, Carlsen better than me. Played bishop b4, which saves his bishop and stops black from taking on c4. Knight d3, confusing the audience. Again, I would completely crumble here because too many threats. I give up. Carlsen takes. You can't play queen takes d3. Bishop's hanging. So he played rook e d1. Rook c7. Knife f5, attacking the d6 pawn. Bishop c8, always retreat. I was complaining about that bishop a lot, so I guess Duda heard me. Knight e3. Knight takes d6. Black has a lot of tactics, but I assume I can just take, then take on c4, because the bishop's not blocking the queen anymore. So he super defended his c4 pawn, and he stopped rook e2. Now, more importantly than that, Duda knows my rules. Always sack the exchange. And the idea is obvious. If you take, then your bishop's hanging. You can't do that. Duda must have expected f takes e3. White's pawn structure's messed up. Black can keep his dominating pawn on the 6th rank with bishop f5. That's a pretty annoying pawn. I don't know if black has full compensation, but Magnus want to take with the queen. That's a better pawn structure. So he played the Zwischenzug, rook a1. He's like, move your queen away from my bishop so I can take with the queen. And Duda says, no, I'm going to keep on your bishop. And Carlsen says, I insist. Now the bishop's defended. So now I'm going to play queen takes rook. So black got a pawn for his exchange. Bishop f5, defending the pawn on the 6th rank. Little skewer action. Queen b3 is forced. That way, if you take the rook, I take this rook. Pretty tricky. And this pawn is sort of corralled. We're not worried about it. Black is worried about a white rook coming to the 8th rank, because that looks terrible. However, bishop is stopping rook c8. So plays rook a7, pretending to threaten the a6 pawn. Then he plays rook a8. Now he's threatening rook takes check. And then, rook takes check, king takes, bishop takes check, and queen takes queen. Duda sees that, plays queen d7, queen b6, big attack on the d pawn, and so forth. A pawn's attacked. Black's just hopeless here. Black played queen f5, which is a blunder. I think he's losing anyway, so it just speeds up the losing process. Then Magnus plays a very simple tactic. If you take the rook, then queen d8 is mate. So he played king h7. Magnus said, okay, I'm going to rook up. Queen in the center. And black's down a rook. So black resigned. So very complicated game where white dominated d5 the whole game. Black tried to get counterplay, and unfortunately, he was playing Magnus Carlsen. I think if white was a weaker player, Duda would have got good counterplay and had winning chances. But Carlsen too solid. Okay, last but not least, sorry we're going so late. This game didn't take very long. Wesley so white against Rolando Nolte. This game was played in 2009. And in 2009, Wesley's FIDE rating was 26-27. So this isn't the super duper GM Wesley. This is like regular GM Wesley. Okay, they played, what we said, the Boleslavsky. Okay, Wesley played knight b3. So we've seen 2 knight b3s and 2 knight f3s. It can't be that one's better, because then all the grandmasters will play the one that's better. Just different. Bishop e7, the first guy who didn't play h6. And Wesley plays f4 immediately. He's young, wants to play aggressive. a5, which we saw Nigel do. Push those a pawn. a4, giving away the b4 square, but stopping a4. So knight b4. King h1, getting off of this diagonal. Bishop d7, usually the bishop goes to c6. Okay, threatening the e4 pawn. Wesley defends the e4 pawn. And it's a big fight for d5. Black's got a lot of guys on d5, and if black plays d5, he's got another guy on d5. Unfortunately, e5 isn't protected if you play d5. So he took on f4, takes back. Unfortunately, the knight's not on c6. It went to b4, so the knight can't go to e5 where it wants to go. And with the e5 pawn gone, now white can play knight d4, knight f5. So advantage white. d5, black wants to play d5. Big fight for d5. e5, knight goes to e4, aggressive. Knight goes to d4. Knight is blockading the pawn. We'll go to f5 later. Knight g5, black wants the 2 bishops. Bishop g4, Wesley says no. Bishop c5, bishop e3, and I don't want to call this the losing move, but it might be. Bishop takes d4. I mean, white was threatening knight takes c6, winning the bishop. But I think bishop takes d4 strategically loses, because now white dominates the dark squares, and black doesn't have the compensation. all the dark squares are whites. And you might be saying dark squares. What am I, a grandmaster? The game almost ends really soon because dark squares become a big issue. This game ends pretty quickly. 96, blockade. 92, knight wants to come to d4 and f5, as we did previously. Keeps his 2 bishops. Black tries to get counterplay, but there is no counterplay. But he's trying to. And d4 gives up the e4 square, but, you know, it's counterplay. Bishop e1 attacking the queen. Queen h5. Man, the truth hurts. Okay, so white has a vicious attack all over black's king. Bishop h4 is coming. Man, truth hurts. g6. Wesley plays queen h6 and says, why don't you take my bishop so I can go here? Okay, now in this position, black resigned. Now, okay, white's threatening knight f6. That's a big threat. So if I was playing a blitz game, I would play knight d5. Okay, now this position, I analyzed in my head for about 5 seconds before the class started. And I was like, man, bishop h4 is annoying. I mean, it's really annoying. And then white's just checkmating black and winning the queen and putting anything on f6. If the queen moves, anything to f6 wins. I don't even know which is better. They're both mate. So that means black has to play f6. And frankly, that's terrible. Black's just going to lose a lot of material. So after queen h6, black resigned. Very nice game from Wesley. Got the 2 bishops. He kept them. Started a kingside attack. Black was always ready to take this. Too late. I hope you enjoyed that lecture on the Boleslavsky Hole. This is Grandmaster Ben Finegold. I want to thank our sponsor, Robert Veneris, for sponsoring the lecture. You too can sponsor a lecture. Just contact my wife, Karen. Her information is in the video description. Always look at the video description. It tells you a lot of stuff. But it also tells you how to sponsor a lecture. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment. I'll see you guys next time with more weekly lectures. Bye, everybody.